Episode number 333, Staffing Trends, Culture, and Succession Planning with William Vanderbloemen. Let's do it.
This is the definitive podcast for helping you plan, create, and execute dynamic worship experiences at your church. Useful, practical content in the areas of production, worship, communications, first impressions, and more. This is Making Sunday Happen.
Well, hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you here this week. On today's episode of the show, I welcome William Vanderbloemen. William has been able to combine over 15 years of ministry experience as a senior pastor with the best practices of executive search. He is the author of Search, the Pastoral Search Committee Handbook, also Culture Wins, the Roadmap to an Irresistible Workplace, and his latest book, Next, Pastoral Succession That Works. We're going to talk about all three topics today: staffing trends, culture, succession planning, all of that on today's episode. You are really in for a treat today. William is the best in the business when it comes to this stuff. So William Vanderbloemen is coming up right after this.
Digital signs are everywhere and can be an effective way of distributing information. However, they're costly to set up and maintain. Sign Presenter changes this by providing a simple and affordable digital signage platform that anyone can use. In fact, you can have your sign up and running today. Simply create an account and upload the messages you want to display. If you don't already have messages created, our web-based designer makes it easy to create them. Preview your screen, and once you're happy with it, pick up an Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K at a local store. Plug it into your TV and download our app. That's it. Your messages will start displaying immediately. Visit signpresenter.com and claim your free trial.
Hey guys, today I welcome William Vanderbloemen. William has been a senior pastor with years of experience in ministry and business. He's the founder of the Vanderbloemen Group, a leading Christian executive search firm. Your church might have found their pastor through them. They help churches and ministries find the right people for their team. William, thanks so much for hanging out, man. Appreciate the time.
Oh, good to be with you, Carl. Always a joy.
Now, so before we get in, for those who may not know about you guys, tell us a little background about you and about what you guys do at Vanderbloemen Group.
Yeah, so we help churches find their pastor. And you say, well, how in the world do you do that? In fact, when you get on a plane and people are like, what's your name and what do you do and all that, when I tell them what we do, they're like, I didn't know there was a company that helped churches find. There wasn't. I was a pastor, then went into the corporate world. And the very short version is our CEO at our very large company went through a succession and used this thing called a search firm. And within 100 days, he had his successor. There was no hiccup. And I looked back, I served some amazing churches, really great places that shouldn't have a hard time finding anyone to come work there, that took years to find their pastor. And I ended up, in hindsight, I can say it cleaner, I ended up just wondering, why does the business world have a better solution than the bride? And decided to launch this company on a card table. We put all our savings kind of toward it to see if we could make it go. And it was the fall of 2008, which was just brilliant time to quit your job.
Perfect timing there, bud.
Exactly. And, since then, we're still figuring it out. Every time we do a search, we learn something. We've been a little bit of a David and Goliath with these large corporate search firms that are out there. They're like, why are you winning that when we're trying to win? But there's something about having been in ministry that shows, you know this, the church is not a business. No, but it's also a business.
Correct.
But it's not a business. But it's a business. So it's like this weird tightrope thing, and we're figuring it out as we go. But I think we're somewhere around 2,500 searches done now, and repetition sometimes is the way you forge some level of expertise. So I don't know that we're any smarter than anybody else. We've just done it more times.
Yeah,
and it's also heads of school for Christian schools, CEOs for nonprofits, and subordinate staff too, as long as they're full-time and sort of toward the top of the org chart. So more than you wanted to hear. That's what we're
great, man. No,
we're trying to make sure that the bride has just as good a solution as the business world.
Yeah, and good people. All right, so give me a temperature check on where do you think we are with the church, with staffing, with team culture. Obviously, been through a crazy year, and I want to get through some details of that. But what are you seeing right now as far as trends in hiring for ministries and church?
Well, it's funny. I read your questions. Thanks for sending some of them ahead of time. And it was a temperature check. And here I am. We're recording now in the season of red cups, right?
Right.
So you would think it's a wintry wonderland. And I went for my long run yesterday morning and it was 83 degrees. So Houston is actually a pretty good illustration of my answer to the question. It ought to be over, but summer ain't over here. And it's the churn and the turnover and all the job shuffling that started a year ago. We called it ahead of time. So there's going to be a great resignation. And like the whole world's picked up on that prediction and it's happening. And you'd think it's over now, but it's like 83 degrees in Houston in December. Summer isn't over. And it's the same with the job market. There's just a lot of movement. And that's going to cascade for a while. I think that there is a difference now. I think we're starting to see something of more of a predictable life than we have. I think for a while I kept waiting on when the pandemic's going to end. It's not going to end. We're going to run out of Greek alphabet letters, I guess. But we're. I'm so glad I learned.
I haven't heard it put that way. That was great.
Well, it's just going to keep happening. I mean, the flu mutates every year. I think we're better prepared to live with it. And why do I say all that? I'm not a health expert. I think people are realizing, okay, it's time to get on with it with church, with hiring a pastor, with making a career move. And so I don't think it's 2020, so stuff's weird is as much of the temperature that I'm feeling, but it's just going to stay warm when it should be cold. This is going to take longer. It's going to be part of our life. And so somehow that feels kind of refreshing. People are like, no, we're figuring out how to live with it rather than wait on it to be over.
Yeah, we just did a survey with churches on what media content they want to see in the next season from us, whether that's in our ready-made library of stuff that they can get for every Sunday. And, there for a while, it was definitely, how do we live with fear not, all that kind of hope, that kind of language. But what we're hearing a lot, and I think this resonates with what you're talking about, is we're done with that. We're moving on. It's book studies. It's we don't want to see that anymore. Not that it's we're not wanting to be conscious of people's health and things like that, but it's okay. We're learning to live with this thing, and let's move on to a book study or let's move on to something else. So it sounds like you guys are seeing that in the staffing world as well. And
I'd say, Carl, we're seeing it in the emotional mindset of team members, whether it's pastors or subordinate team players, however you want to say it. I think for a while there was fatigue. I'm thinking of quitting. It was really bad. And I liken it to, I'm not a fast runner. I'm kind of a diesel engine. I just keep, so I do the longer races like marathon. And every time I've done a marathon, in about mile 2 or 3, I go, oh crap, I've got 24 more of these to go. And it's the worst part of the race. And then after 5-6 miles, you just sort of settle in like, I'm going to click off another mile. And I think that's where people's temperature really is right now. Like, it is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And the part where you go, oh, this is going to be hard. It feels like we either processed that or we've gone into denial or something, but it's more like, all right, let's click off another mile. And that gives me great encouragement. It does not mean that people are going to settle into their job and be there. I think this shuffling of the deck is going to go on well into next year. So
do you think that comes from, you mentioned fatigue. Does that come from burnout? Does it come from, I want to be close to family? Does it, did COVID kind of put things in perspective? Where does that come from?
Well, I think there are a number of dynamics at play. I did a really long podcast on this some time back that's gotten quite a bit of traction with Carrie Newhoff. People can go look that up if they want, if they've got an extra 2 hours sitting around in their day. And just briefly, I think people 2020 got people out of their routine.
Yep.
Kind of like a sabbatical gets pastors out of their routine. And so many times people take a sabbatical and they come back and they quit. Well, it's not because they hate their job. It's because they got out of the rut long enough to go, why am I doing this? So I think there's a lot of people saying, why am I a pastor because my granddad and my dad were? Am I a pastor because I really feel called to it? There's a why. There's also a where. Like all of America is like, well, I can work from anywhere. Or life's short. Do I really want to live in Houston? The answer is yes for me. Or do I want to be near mom and dad because they're getting older? Or the grandkids are growing up so fast. So there's a where question in addition to the why. And then I also just think this whole, the millennial generation has never lived as an adult through a bear market of an economy ever. So, and that's not to pick on them. It's just to say we've grown up in a very relatively stable period of time. And I think 2020 has shown people that life's really fragile. And it can just go away like a wisp of air, as Solomon said. It's just everything's vanity. And I think, at least for me, the pandemic made me realize all this can go away real fast. So I better use what time I have in a way that I'm going to think counts. And that's caused some people to leave ministry. It's caused people to get into ministry. It's caused people to say, I want a different kind of ministry. So there's a why am I doing things? There's a where am I doing things? And then there's a little bit of an urgency that comes in. And I'll tell you, Carl, that urgency piece gives me incredible optimism for the church.
Yeah.
You look at when the U.S. church grew the most, right after World War II, right after a whole generation of young people saw their friends die, saw life hang in the balance. Frankly, not to be melodramatic, is good going to win or evil? Like, which way is this going to go? And that, it's not just Billy Graham was a great preacher. Billy Graham was in the right place at the right time, placed by God, used by God, right? I wonder that was a war that consumed some of the world, but not the whole world. And it was a war that came when we had this breakthrough with TV coming right afterward. Think about this. We have a global pandemic. First time in the history of the church, no one's met for Easter anywhere.
I know. Incredible.
And then you couple that with the breakthrough in communication that's happened because of the pandemic. And I just am really bullish about people getting to know Jesus for the first time. I don't know what church will look like. Is it hybrid? Is it online? Is it? Right. But it's going to be an incredible season of opportunity. Sermon over. Sorry.
Yeah. I hope so too. The church I'm attending is growing by leaps and bounds, and I'm hoping that it's similar than like 9/11. We saw that where attendance kind of went up. I hope it doesn't die down. So we'll see. How does that relating to the positions that people are hiring? Are there different? What are people looking for right now?
Well, I'm not just saying something that fits with your podcast, but I think there's an advent of a new position or a new authority for an existing position. And I don't even know what to call it yet. You guys come up with it and I'll give you the credit, but it's almost like it's not chief communications officer, but it's something close. It's like chief communications officer or White House press secretary. Like, what are we saying about this? But it's this deal, and we've done a number of these searches, mainly for larger, highly entrepreneurial churches. But that's going to cascade down to every single church in America. You need somebody who can not just think about how do I write the bulletin announcement, which does still happen in a whole lot of churches, right? It's also like, how do we manage the church's TikTok account in a way that's congruent? So I'm using this word. I don't know if it's a made up word, omni-channel communication.
Right. It's a digital, they have to have a digital mindset, but I also think it's communication in both worlds. How do we make the physical, and the digital space?
It's polylingual. It's dual citizenship, whatever you want. Digital native that can still write the bulletin announcement and do the banners and all the things that, like we're doing one of these for a very, very large church that has a television ministry, and they're doing TikTok and they're doing direct mail. Like, I didn't even know they still did that, but like
how to do both well.
So now you can take that down to like my mother's church, which is 100 people on Sunday, maybe 200, and pretty traditional. They need someone on staff And maybe it's not even full time, but someone who can manage their live streaming, which they weren't even doing a year ago and probably never would have. And then also manage, the annual report and the weekly newsletter. And in a way that's consistent across all channels. So I think now that we're communicating across a lot of channels, and every church is now, there's got to be somebody that's making sure that messaging is consistent. And it's not just making Sunday great, right? I think that's kind of y'all's deal. Right. Now it's every day, because Sunday might be when I dial in on my run on Tuesday or whatever. So I think this communication piece is huge. And it goes without saying that the tech roles are up and to the right. Some of those are part-time. Yeah. Some of them don't hit our radar as much. We do full-time searches for that. But definitely people are realizing, okay, we got to up our game. It's not going to be the pandemic's over, so the online service is over. The toothpaste is out of the tube, right?
Right. Let me ask you this, because we serve a lot. We've seen a huge increase in our ministry of folks from huge mega churches to really small churches that need help with creating media content. But it's not. I mean, I've been surprised at the mega churches that have full creative teams that still come to us for creating media content. The reason I bring this up is because I'm wondering, is it one role? Because what we're seeing is the demand just is increasing and increasing. Yeah. Because there's so many channels to manage, because there's so much content that could be created. Are you guys seeing that maybe one digital person is not enough and it needs to share between an outsource and a full-time or multiple full-times? How is that looking?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Super good question. I think it's very different for different types of churches. Yeah. I work real hard to remind our team all the time, we serve the normal size church. What do I mean by that? That's 100 people on Sunday. That's normal in America, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. 365,000 Protestant churches in the U.S., something like that. 100,000 of them can't even afford a full-time pastor. Like 365,000 churches, Protestant in the U.S., 1,700 of them are mega churches. So it's like less than the 1%ers. Now, for those people, incredibly important that you have what I call this chief communications officer that's sort of the mastermind over what might be a part-time college student managing the social media account, right, a print person, a storytelling person. And here's what's going to happen. If you're a senior pastor listening to this, pay attention. That chief communications officer is going to have your ear. And if they don't, they should. Almost, I don't want to say in a replacement, but I've seen it happen as a replacement to what used to be, if you go back to the Willow Creek era, Nancy Beach had Bill's ear, right? Because she was the storyteller for the weekend. Well, now it's not just that. It's the storyteller for every channel 24/7. And it's more communications driven, probably overseeing a lot of part-time people and maybe a few full-time. And so in the large church, it is a full-time keystone person that can think through all channels, sit with the pastor in their message planning for the upcoming year, and start to translate that out into social media campaigns. And in the normal size church, it's probably going to play itself out as part of a full-time role. Someone who's there, I don't think you can get by with just the part-time person, because it's got to be somebody who's in the mix all the time to know what's happening, what happened in the community. Churches are going to get more and more hyper local in their preaching. They're going to preach to their zip code, not just to their city. And so you can't have a part-time person or a remote person who's going to have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in the congregation in a way that's effective. So I could see like the church I served first, I was an associate pastor. We had, 200 or 300 in church on a Sunday. And, my job description was pretty much other duties as necessary and do the youth. And, I was terrible at the youth, but I did all the other things. It's going to be like that. It's going to go into someone's bucket as an other duties as necessary. That's going to be very, very necessary.
I think you're right. I think if it's this position and then that person is managing, whether that's an outsourced company like us, whether that's a part-timers, interns, but I agree that person needs to be on staff churning out the communication. Let me ask you this. Do you feel like that person, whatever that position is, has gotten the pastor's ear faster now than they would have 2 years ago? Do you think the pastor's more receptive to that person?
The smart ones are.
Yeah.
I mean, and somebody asked me, how long would it take you to move your office to a new building? And I'm like, if you'd asked me that 2 years ago, I'd have said, wow, we'd need months to plan. And then last year I found out I can do it in a day. It's sort of forced into things. And I think the smarter pastors are listening. I know, because I have a very long list of frustrated worship and creative planners who are like, I'm not at the table like I used to be. There's this new 20-something who has pastor's ear, and it's really frustrating. But that's kind of what's starting to happen. And it'll be messy, like everything is in life and in the church, but it's going to evolve into this chief communicator, White House press secretary. What do we say? What's the messaging that's going out?
That's good. All right. How does that relate to culture? I've heard you talk about a vomit list before. Why don't you explain what that is and how people need to unpack that a little?
Well, to me, I heard a couple questions there. One about culture. To me, I was very focused on hiring around culture. And then I frankly took my eye off the ball a little bit and turned over a lot of our hiring, and it became about competency and efficiency. And so in this last year, with all the churn happened to us. It's happened in every sector. I am just, pardon me, but hell bent on, we hire around culture. I'll let the competency get taught, right? Mm-hmm. What do I mean by that? So I probably said it before, so forgive me if I'm repeating for some of you listeners, but if God's given you a mission or a vision of what he wants you to accomplish, I think your cultural values as a staff are how you're going to behave together while you're accomplishing that vision, right? Your vision's what God wants done. Your culture is how you behave while you get it done. And that doesn't just mean follow the 10 commandments, behave. It means like, what are your family rules? Do you guys move really fast, or are you methodical? It's not a right or wrong, but hire around who you are, right? So that you, and when you figure out who you are and you make critical hires around that, who you are, you'll start to figure out who your most important employees are. And it's not the top 3 on the pay list. Whoever's highest paid is most important. No, the cultural ambassadors for our office are my most important people. And that might be way down the org chart, way up the org chart, paid a little bit, paid a whole lot. The people who are carriers of the culture, and Seth Godin calls it sneezers, where they spread it everywhere. Those are the ones that are most important. And then it gets to this vomit list that you mentioned. I think as we're looking at a year of turnover, I've encouraged people to make sure they know who they really, really, really would miss if they left. When I say vomit list, it's like there are 2 or 3 people on your team, probably no more than that, where if they walked in and said, hey, can I have a minute? We need to talk. And you know what that talk is, like they're leaving. The first thing you look for is a trash can, because you're just going to throw up. Like, who are those key people, and what can you do to retain them, encourage them, empower them to do more of what they're really good at? So, and all of that goes back to building a culture, a workplace people want to be a part of. And in a year where we're just trying to get people to go back to the office altogether, it's worth paying attention to how to build an irresistible workplace like never before.
What do you suggest I do? And I'm sure it has to do with culture, is to retain those people before it gets to the vomit point. Like, is it obviously it's not just money. That's not the huge motivating factor necessarily. How do we build a place where those people will not walk in?
Well, so let's talk about 2 things. Let's talk about right now and then ongoing. Right now, there's a churn, and everybody and their brothers are leaving, moving, and it's contagious. Well, maybe I should be thinking about moving. Maybe I should. So I would encourage leaders right now, do some triage to just keep people Okay. And you can't build a culture overnight. You can't build an irresistible workplace overnight. So this is going to sound crass, but yeah, it is about the money right now. And people who go into church work don't go into it for the money. If they do, then they're either stupid or they're crooks, because there's not a lot of money, right? Nope. A tangible, quick way to show people you really want them around is to bonus them. Mm-hmm. I don't know that, pay increases is a whole nother topic. Inflation is a real thing. Cost of living, depending on where you're living, is going to be between 3% and 7% more next year than this year. So raises are just probably going to have to happen for the people you like.
Yep.
And they may need to happen across the board. But I'm thinking more of quiet, targeted bonuses. And I've even gone so far as to encourage people to consider what the business world would call a retention bonus. And that means, hey, Carl, we're doing this giant media project. You're the quarterback for the thing. It's not going to be over till July. I'm going to bonus you for all that work. And it's whatever the number is, $5,000. It's a big number, but okay, I'm going to give you $5,000 bonus when this is complete. Oh, by the way, I'm going to give it to you today. And I'm also going to give you a piece of paper that says, Carl, unless you get fired for something you did wrong, if you're here in July, you keep the money. If you leave me, you owe me the money back, and you owe me interest. And you can take a week to figure out whether you want to sign that or not. But
is that too strong? Do I feel like, well, gosh, if it's a money chain on me, or is that motivating?
You don't have to take it. Here's what I'm saying, Carl. You're critical to our mission between now and July. Just critical. And I can pray for you. I can tell you Jesus loves you. I can fire up vision, but I want to show you in real dollars that you matter. I'm not doing this for everybody, but you, Carl, I'm giving a bonus, and it's going to be for the amazing work I know you're going to get done, but for the good of the rest of the team, I need to do whatever I can to make sure you're going to be here through that run to July. You leave after that, that would be bad, but you leave before that, it would be awful. So call me crass, but I'm offering you a bonus. You don't have to take it if you don't feel like, I get it, but would you like your bonus early?
Right.
And that might sound a little mercenary, but I'm telling you, this turnover is not going away. And if it gets somebody on your vomit list, you're going to be paying a lot more for it than the bonus you'd be offering.
Right. Which is better to do? And you mentioned a pay increase. Which is better, to do that bonus or to pay increase every 6 months, every few months? Which one is better?
So the bonus piece that I was talking about is really a triage. You're in a crazy storm of turnover, and you need to steer the ship through it. So if you're not, I mean, raises are, raises, like payroll happens every 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. Kind of like pastors who say, Sunday seems to show up every 7 days. It's amazing. So if you increase your payroll, it's going to stay increased, and taking away raises is very, very difficult. So I think people should see increase, but it should not become something that they expect or feel entitled to.
Right.
And I think churches are going to have to find ways to reward people financially without constantly inflating the payroll that happens every 2 weeks. So it's a both and thing. And it really, I'm listening to a sermon series right now by Tim Keller, who taught me preaching in seminary a million years ago. And it's on the book of Proverbs. It's on wisdom. And he keeps saying every week, it's like, everybody wants to just follow the 10 commandments and follow the rules, and that'll give them the right decision. But the truth is, the vast majority of the decisions you're going to have to make on a day-to-day basis have nothing to do with the 10 commandments. It's about wisdom. And so, whether you pay a bonus or do a pay increase, whether you build a great culture or hire great people, all of that is driven down through the lens of, are you doing wise decision-making on attracting and keeping your staff? And I don't know a formula that fits across the board for that. That's why it's wisdom and not rules.
So let me ask you an interesting question, perhaps. a lot of the people who listen to this podcast and who are working on Sunday, planning, creating, executing Sunday, their whole team is volunteers. And so they're not necessarily on staff, or there might be the worship leader is the staff guy. They might have a technical director, that kind of thing. But how does this team culture aspect translate to creating a great team culture for my volunteers?
Yeah, well, so building a great team culture on your paid staff starts with hiring around your cultural values. Like it actually starts with figuring out what those cultural values are. And here's one question you can ask your team to figure out how you behave. When we are functioning at our very best, what do we do that's common to us, but uncommon to other teams around us? What's our quirky behaviors that we all do together when we're firing on all pistons? Like for us, it's crazy responsiveness is one of them. And that's one of our values, ridiculous responsiveness. I outline all of this in a book I wrote several years ago called Culture Wins. It's a quick read. It's not rocket science, but it lays out a map and a plan for naming your values. Well, once you have those values, then you can interview around the values. That gives you your interview questions. Okay, well, what in the world does this have to do with volunteers? Listen, if you're just I was the worst volunteer recruiter ever as a pastor. I would stand up on, the second Sunday in August before school starts. Oh my gosh, we need children's volunteers. Who wants to do that? And there's no retirement in the Bible. You might be old, but you can still volunteer. That's the worst. Yeah. No, smart volunteer recruiters treat recruiting volunteers with the same care and process as hiring staff. So when you're trying to build a great culture around your volunteers, I think you got to start by asking yourself, how are we hiring our volunteers, and are we hiring around the culture we want to engender, or are we just taking whatever person can put fog on a mirror?
Exactly. Which is the reason why I ask you, because I think the principles still apply. When I was on staff at New Spring Church, we saw a massive increase in our volunteers in the tech area, which is known for being behind the scenes nerds. And we saw a massive increase. And I think it was a culture shift of treating them with like we were to hire them. Like, even though there's not a paycheck involved, the responsibilities, we had job descriptions, we had an org chart, we had, the works. It was, here's what we're asking you to do. Can you come, and creating a culture in that. So I think that some of the same principles do
Absolutely.
apply.
Carl, just to underline it, I didn't learn this from church. I was in the mainline church. Great churches like New Spring get this. I would never, Princeton Seminary, not one class on volunteer recruiting and how to do it. Where I learned it was the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, largest rodeo in the world here in Houston. There are something like 100 or more committees for volunteers, and there'll be several hundred volunteers on each committee. And there's a wait list. Like, you have to know somebody to get onto the committee, where they're going to tell you what work you have to do for 20 hours so that you get your volunteer buckle, which we were big buckles. But like, they treat it like, hey, this is a privilege. This is not scarce need where I've just got to have a warm body. And it flips the whole script.
It does, man. Nobody wants to go down with the sinking ship. So when you pitch it that way, like, we need volunteers. Don't you love Jesus? Like, I'm not motivated by that. If you present an opportunity and a vision to me of where you're going, and it's exciting and it's a privilege to be a part of, I'd rather go on that. Okay. Tell me about millennials as in way of church culture and hiring. Are they joining a church staff? Are they leaving church staff? Where does the younger generation fit in culture and hiring?
Well, you asked me about millennials, and then you asked me about the younger generation. Those are not the same thing.
All right. Help me define that.
So one of my dear friends here on staff says I'm now a geriatric millennial because she's 31 or 2 or whatever that means. Gen Z is where you need to push the conversation down if you really want to talk about younger. But
that's fair.
are they joining churches? Are they joining church staffs? I think millennials get a bad rap. Like, they don't have any commitment. Oh, they're lazy. No, I don't believe all that. I think it's just a different day and time.
Is that on that person to not pitch the vision and give them a value and something to care about? Is there a piece there?
Hear me out, Carl. So Gallup, been around forever, polling, right? Mm-hmm. They asked the question, when in U.S. history was the church good at gathering people right after the college years? Right? Because everybody complains, like, we can't get anybody right out of college. Nobody wants to come to church. Well, when were we good at it? So they looked at the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. You know when we were best at it? Never been good at it. So people leave church during the time that they become an adult. When do they come back to church? When they have a baby.
Start having kids.
So you look at millennials now, they're waiting to get married. I got a 28-year-old that I'm waiting for him to get married. I'm ready to step into whatever they're going to call me, the next generation coming, but it ain't happening yet. Well, if they're not getting married and having kids, the draw that the church isn't doing a bad job, and they're not bad people. It's just like the thing that has been there is missing. So churches need to say, how do we serve a generation that's waiting?
Good.
How do we come alongside and understand? And there's just so much that's been written about how to work with millennials, what to expect. I think you asked about staffing, from a staffing position, they're very likely to go into church. You've got a better shot at this generation than ever because they're driven by cause. I mean, right. Like, how many bajillion views does the Simon Sinek Why Before
Start
What?
With why, yeah.
Yeah, start with why. I mean, it's been viewed like more times than Taylor Swift or something like that, right? So you've got a great shot at them. What you don't have a great shot at is a long tenure. Like,
right.
This generation.
Gone are the days of the 30 years in one place, get the gold trophy, gold watch.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. I mean, and you think about it. We just grew up a different time. I'm old enough that when I give talks, I'll say, so anybody out there like me, when I was growing up, when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, my very favorite time of the whole week was Saturday morning. And I'll see the people my age smile, and you probably don't even know why.
Cartoons, baby.
Cartoons were on. That's right. So ask a millennial, when are the cartoons on? Whenever I want them to be on.
Right. On demand.
That's right. So, by the way, if you wonder why a generation turns out demanding, if they grow up with everything on demand, guess what? But the whole, like, we had 3 channels. I remember when Fox came out, there was a 4th channel. Are you kidding me? Well, now, of course, people bounce from career to career because you can bounce from rabbit hole to rabbit hole down the internet. You can study whatever you want. So I think really the key question I'm focusing on with millennials, there's a big piece to hiring, but retention is going to be the ballgame in the next 10 years in the workplace. Every job sector, whoever's good at retaining employees, even if not 30 years ago, watch, but instead of 2 years, could you get 3? And I know that sounds minor, but let me tell you, it costs a lot to go hire people and to hire search firms to help you hire people. What could you do to build a workplace where a person would stay just a little longer than the norm? It's going to be the game changer. And I'm talking about
What's one key to that?
Build a great culture. I mean, and you want the quickest way I know to measure whether or not you're doing a good job of building an irresistible workplace. When's the last time somebody you hired came to you because someone else on the team said, hey, you're my friend, you should come work with us? Like, how often is that happening? Or are you having to go beat the bushes, and are your people referring their friends to you as an employer? It's like the Amazon, would you refer this product to a friend? It's the quickest way to see who your net promoters are, right? So, I think build an irresistible workplace where people want to be together. And there are lots of keys to that. It's in the Culture Wins book, but we don't have time to go into all of it. But
no, in the couple minutes that we have left together, let's talk about succession. You wrote a book on this recently. Tell me, are churches looking to succession plans? Did COVID bring this to light more that we need to really consider a plan? What's the give me the temperature check on succession plan?
Yeah, so I wrote a book with my friend Warren Bird. It's called Next, Pastoral Succession That Works. We wrote it in 2014. It came out, so 7 years ago. And, my mother thought she was going to have to buy all 10 copies of it. So it's like, what are you writing a book about? Are you kidding me? Who's going to talk about it? But
Man.
Up until then, my take on things was succession conversations happen in the parking lot and nobody wants to talk about them out loud because it sounds like we think pastors should leave. Pastors don't want to talk about it because it sounds like they're tapping out or they're lame ducks.
Right.
And we wrote the book just to say, could we help this conversation move from the parking lot into the boardroom and be a healthy, normal conversation like it is in regular companies? Can the bride be as good at this as the business world? Mm-hmm. Right? Same question that drove me to start the company.
Yeah.
Fast forward 7 years. Baker asked us to re-release the book, updated and expanded. There's 150 new pages of research. It's amazing. The biggest mistake in that book is, here's a tip for you, Carl. Next time we have a pandemic, do not release your book the same week the world shuts down. That's really not a good idea. So,
on the span of your career here in 2008 and then this, you need to work on your timing there, dude.
I know it's pretty crummy, but the conversation was moving out of the parking lot and into the boardroom. Like I'm getting calls to go talk to bishops about how to place Anglican pastors or, weird scenarios that you wouldn't think they're going to talk about succession, but everyone was talking about it before the pandemic. And I think the pandemic, like it did with so many other things, it was just the great accelerator of the conversation. It's also accelerated some people's timelines because they're like, the church needs a whole new kind of pastor, which would be a really good podcast sometime. But a lot of guys that were 1 or 2 years away from saying it's time for a change have said, let's speed this up because we need a new kind of leader that it's not me. And that's
so
okay.
Who did you write it for? And you wrote it for a couple of audiences, right?
Yeah. What do they say? You write it for the primary reader and then you write it for the guy that's looking over the primary reader's shoulder.
Right.
So the primary reader that we wrote it for originally was the 60-year-old. What am I going to do? This has got to happen. And then looking right over his shoulder is the much younger pastor who's at a church that he's pretty sure this is not his last church. So how do I get the place ready for when I leave? And I hate to sound like, Jesus doesn't have to move you to bigger churches every time, right? Sometimes he went to smaller towns and not. But if you're in a single A ball club and you're looking for when you're going to double A, so that was the primary audiences. Now I think they've melded into one guy, and it might be gal too, but it's really kind of a person who's 40 to 50, and they know this is coming, whether it's because this is a temporary stay or I'm in a massive church. Like we get hired all the time now by churches where the pastor's 50 and they're like, we know he's not going to retire for 15 more years, but what do we need to start doing now so that we have options when that day comes? So it's really shifted as the conversations become more mainstream. The audience has gotten younger and younger, and it's an understanding that every single position on staff is an interim position, all of them.
Yeah, whether you like it or not.
Yeah,
I think just know that people aren't going to stay for 30 years. Is that what you mean?
I mean, I've said this so many times. Sorry if you've heard me say it, but like you only get, I can't think of more than 3 possible endings for a pastor's time in ministry. Like I just can't. 1, you run your church into the ground and it closes. Not cool. I've seen it happen. It's not cool.
Yeah.
2, you get to be the pastor of your church on the day Jesus returns. Super duper cool. Very hard to get on the calendar, right? 3, somebody's coming in after you to be the next pastor of this church. Like that's it.
Right.
So every pastor is an interim pastor. Every student pastor is an interim student pastor. Every tech person is an interim tech person. It's just by design. We're all, what's the Carrie Underwood? This is my temporary home, right? It's all interim. And I think people are starting to understand that and have healthy conversations about it.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, as we wrap, tell us how we can get in touch with you guys. If my church or my ministry is looking for help in hiring my next person, how do we get help from your team?
Yeah, well, I never intended to name our company after me. In fact, I didn't want it that way. But the search engine guys told me, William, your last name is so screwed up. You can misspell it. You can misspell it in Google about 100 different ways and it'll still drive back to the site. And that's the best way. It's also, our site has, I think we're up to like 3,500 free pieces of content on the site just to help you. Some of the things you probably didn't learn in seminary or Bible college about how you run a team, how you hire a volunteer, how you fire a volunteer. That's an interesting conversation. All those resources are there. So go there and use the free stuff. And then if you ever need us, you'll know how to find us.
Good. Awesome. Well, man, it's a privilege every time I chat with you. I appreciate the time today, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carl. Appreciate it. And love what you guys are doing. Love to come back and visit with you again sometime.
Yeah. Thank you, man.
The Church Online Guide is a comprehensive handbook for crafting your online worship experience. This 75-page guide will give you helpful tips and resources like ideas for your service flow, tips for your website, how to craft kids and student experiences, online giving, turning your live stream into an online campus of your church, and more. Pick up a copy of the book today and watch our free Church Online web series at 1230.media/churchonline. 1230.media/churchonline. The show notes for this episode are available now at makingsundayhappen.com.
Well, hey guys, thanks so much for hanging out. Next week on the show, my friend Tom Bump will join me. Tom is the founder of Restoring Leaders and also the author of the brand new book, Valleys Over Mountains, a guide through the hard seasons. Tom and I are going to be talking about burnout in ministry and how to prevent it. A lot of us in ministry are weary. We've been through a very hard season and we're just plain tired. So how do we prevent ourselves from burning out completely? We're going to talk about that next week. Well, we would love to connect with you. You can learn more about what we're doing at 1230 Media, providing churches, ministries, and artists with ready-made media content, custom media, and training to make Sunday happen in person and online. And we would love for you to check us out. 1230.media is our website, 1230.media. We'll go out there and create some incredible worship experiences this weekend. I'll catch you next week.
Making Sunday Happen is a production of the ministry of 1230 Media. For show notes, archive episodes, and more free resources for your church, visit makingsundayhappen.com.